Above 8,000 meters, climbers enter what's known as the death zone. The air is so thin the body can no longer repair itself. Cells break down faster than they regenerate. Organs begin to fail. And every step forward comes at the cost of something that the body will never get back. Most climbers who die on Everest, they don't die from falling. They die from staying too long. That metaphor just became the most talked about description of Russia's economy. And it didn't come from a YouTube channel or a cable news pundit. It came from Alexandra Prokopenko, one of the most respected economists studying Russia today, writing in The Economist in February of 2026. Her argument is devastating. Russia's economy, it hasn't collapsed. It's done something worse. It's entered a state where survival today is only possible by destroying tomorrow. And that is exactly what we're going to break down on this episode of Fall of Nations. Because for 3 years, the world has been waiting for Russia to fall apart. But it hasn't. Its economy is still functioning. Its factories are still churning. Its army is still fighting. Which is exactly why what's happening right now is so dangerous. Russia has found a way to survive, but only by eating itself alive. Military spending has surged to levels not seen since the Soviet era. Reserves are being drained. Civilian industries are suffocating under crushing interest rates. Skilled workers are disappearing to war, to exile, or to early graves. The system looks stable, but it stopped building a future. And when a nation stops investing in tomorrow, its death has already begun. This is how Russia finally dies. Not in a single moment, but through a series of sacrifices that make survival today possible, and survival the next decade impossible. Let's start with the part that confuses everyone. Now, on paper, Russia looks like it's doing just fine. GDP grew, unemployment hit record lows, defense factories are running triple shifts around the clock, tanks and missiles roll off production lines like cars at a Toyota plant. Wages are climbing, and the Kremlin points to every single one of these numbers as proof. Proof that the West's sanctions have failed, and that Russia is stronger than ever. Now, for a while, a lot of people bought it. Western headlines ran stories about Russia's surprising resilience. Even the IMF acknowledged growth figures that, in isolation, looked respectable. Russia's early resilience wasn't a fluke. It was built on ultra-conservative macro policy habits, massive energy windfalls, and crisis management routines developed through years of prior shocks. The Kremlin knew how to absorb a punch. But resilience and regeneration are two very different things. And what those headline numbers are hiding is something far more dangerous. Here is what they don't tell you. Russia is now spending more than 7% of its entire GDP on the military, more than double what it spent before its invasion of Ukraine. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, total military expenditure hit an estimated $149 billion in 2024, a staggering 38% increase from the year before. In 1 year, about a third of the entire federal budget now flows directly into national defense. And when you add broader security spending, meaning internal troops, border forces, the National Guard, that share climbs to nearly 40% of all government money. Let that sink in. 4 out of every 10 rubles that the Russian government spends now goes to war and security. But it gets worse. Nearly 29% of Russia's total budget spending is now classified, secret, hidden from any public scrutiny. We're not talking about a few black budget intelligence line items. We're talking about almost a third of all government expenditure flowing through channels that are designed to resist any accountability whatsoever. Nobody outside the Kremlin's inner circle knows where that money goes. And that is by design. So what's getting squeezed to pay for all of this? Everything else. Combined spending on social policy, education, and healthcare has dropped to just under 24.4% of the total budget. 5 full percentage points less than in 2024 alone, and a full third less than before the invasion began. Russia's finance minister didn't even try to disguise it. When announcing the value-added tax hike from 20% to 22% in 2026, Anton Siluanov said openly that extra revenue would be channeled directly to security and defense. The Russian government has made its choice and telling its own people exactly where they rank. So the machine is running, but it's not running on growth, not on innovation, not on investment. It's running on sacrifice, and that sacrifice has a price tag that the Kremlin can't hide much longer. Now here's where things start to unravel. By the end of 2025, Russia's federal budget deficit had ballooned to 5.6 trillion rubles, roughly 2.6% of GDP. That's the highest since 2020. That number alone might not sound catastrophic, but zoom out, connect the dots, and the picture, it turns dark very quickly. GDP growth, which has nearly reached 4% during the wartime spending boom of 2023 and 24, has slowed dramatically. The IMF now forecasts roughly 1% growth for 2026. Some Russian economists project even less. The wartime sugar rush is wearing off, and there's no second dose coming. The economy has largely exhausted the temporary drivers that powered the boom: post-shock rebound, massive state spending injections, and defense-led demand. All of those are fading. The central bank's key interest rate, even after a modest cut in February of 2026, still sits at a punishing 15.5%. That's not a normal economy. That's emergency-level monetary tightening designed to fight inflation. But it's also strangling every civilian business in the country that needs a loan or needs imported equipment or needs to plan anything beyond next quarter. Analysts have warned that the high rates are pushing firms toward bankruptcy, forcing the finance ministry into non-military spending cuts and delaying investments that the economy desperately needs just to stay functional. Russia's own Center for Macroeconomic Analysis has, by formal criteria, identified an emerging banking crisis, with problematic assets exceeding 10% of the system's total. Now, one of Russia's two largest real estate developers is reportedly on the verge of collapse. The cracks are widening, and the central bank is running out of tools to hold them together. Now, meanwhile, Russia's external debt has quietly climbed to nearly $62 billion, a 20-year high, as Moscow borrows more to finance a war that it can't afford to stop. The problem isn't the size of the debt alone, it's the cost. With domestic bond yields above 15%, every ruble borrowed comes with punishing interest attached. And here's a number that should stop you cold. By 2026, Russia's interest payments on government debt are on track to exceed its combined spending on education and healthcare. Debt servicing has become one of the fastest growing lines in the entire federal budget, jumping from 2.6 trillion rubles in 2024 to 3.2 trillion in 2025, and climbing further. The government now devotes nearly 9% of all public funds just to servicing what it already owes, double the share from just 5 years ago. A country paying more to service debt than it spends teaching its children or treating its sick. That's not a country building a future, that's a country consuming one. But the fiscal trap is only the visible layer. What's happening underneath is far more structural and far harder to reverse. And this is where the death zone analogy stops being a metaphor and starts being a clinical diagnosis. By 2026, economists were increasingly describing Russia as two separate economies trapped inside one border. The first one is the military-industrial core. It receives priority access to everything: labor, capital, imports, state funding. Production lines run day and night. Procurement is guaranteed. The state absorbs costs that would sink a private firm without blinking. Defense wages have skyrocketed, pulling workers from every other industry like a financial black hole, offering salaries that civilian companies simply can't match. The second Russia is everyone else: small businesses, tech startups, services, manufacturing firms, farmers, all facing crushing borrowing costs, restricted imports, vanishing skilled workers, and an investment climate that says one thing loud and clear: you are on your own. One widely cited analysis put it in blunt physiological language: the vital organs get the blood flow, and the extremities are left to freeze. And here's what should alarm everyone who looks at those GDP numbers and thinks that Russia is doing fine. The country's total manufacturing growth over the past 3 years, the headline number that the Kremlin loves to celebrate, was driven overwhelmingly by military production. Strip out defense-linked output and civilian industry, it didn't just stagnate, it shrank. All that growth that everyone keeps talking about, a wartime mirage, powered not by economic health, but by ammunition orders and tank contracts. Products designed to be destroyed, not to build a single thing for the decade ahead. Economists have a name for this dynamic: military rent. In the old model, old money flowed in from foreign buyers, revenue from outside the system that at least brought real wealth into the country. But in the new model, the state is simply redistributing its own internal resources toward production that generates zero civilian return. Wages do get paid, GDP numbers tick upward, but nothing is being saved. Nothing is being renewed. The economy is feeding on itself. And here's the part that makes the trap fully, inescapable. Even in the best case scenario, even if peace did come tomorrow, any transition from this militarized economy back to a civilian one would require simultaneous labor retraining on a massive scale, restored technology access, credible security guarantees for investors, procurement reform, and a vibrant small business sector ready to absorb millions of workers. The chances of all those conditions aligning? Well, analysts assess them as extremely unlikely. The war economy can be stabilized. It cannot be made healthy without reversing the very incentives that keep it alive. And that is the heart of the death zone. The economy is moving, but it's not regenerating. Every step forward costs something it will never get back. If this breakdown is opening your eyes to what's really happening, be sure to take a second and subscribe to Fall of Nations. We cover the geopolitical shifts that the mainstream won't touch, and we go deeper than anyone else. Hit that bell, because what's coming next is the part that Russia cannot fix, even if the war ended tomorrow. Every war burns through money and materials, but what makes long war economically lethal is that it doesn't just consume resources, it consumes people. And people are the one thing that Russia absolutely cannot replace. Russia entered the 2020s already facing a slow-motion demographic disaster, an aging population, declining birth rates, and shrinking cohorts entering prime working age. United Nations projections had flagged Russia's trajectory well before a single shot was fired in Ukraine. The war made every one of those pressures worse, much worse. Hundreds of thousands of men have been mobilized or recruited into military service, many from the very working-age cohorts that Russia's economy depends on. Casualty figures remain officially classified, but independent estimates suggest that the toll has been enormous. And it's not just the dead and wounded. Every soldier pulled from a factory, a hospital, a construction site, or an engineering firm is one fewer worker contributing to the civilian economy. On top of the mobilization, independent research estimates that up to roughly 1 million Russians left the country during 2022 and 23, one of the largest emigration waves in modern Russian history. And these weren't retirees or low-skilled workers looking for better weather. A significant portion were IT specialists, engineers, financial professionals, entrepreneurs, the exact people that a modern economy needs to innovate, compete, and grow. They packed up and left, and many aren't coming back. Inside Russia, labor markets have tightened to a breaking point. Unemployment sits at record lows, not because the economy is thriving, but because the labor pool has been bled dry. Workers have been pulled into military service, diverted to defense factories, or have simply fled the country. Civilian employers are scrapping over whoever remains, driving up wages in a way that feeds inflation without producing any actual productivity gains. Defense wages, pumped up by state money and war bonuses, have created a devastating suction effect across the entire economy. Skilled workers are being pulled out of tech, healthcare, services, and competitive manufacturing, drawn by paychecks that civilian firms cannot match. These are the sectors that generate long-term growth, innovation, and real economic multipliers. Without them, there's no future economy to speak of. And here's where the sanctions twist the knife even deeper. Normally, labor shortages can be offset by automation, better machines, smarter systems, modern production methods, but the West has specifically targeted the advanced machinery, microelectronics, and high-tech components that Russia would need to modernize. Import prices for sanctioned goods have surged dramatically, even through third-world countries, and the effect has gotten worse over time, not better, according to the Bank of Finland research. So the labor gaps don't get solved, they get patched with longer shifts, more overtime, lower quality substitutes, and improvised supply chains. Analysts describe it as primitive adaptation. The lights do stay on, but nothing is being built. The body can move, but it can't rebuild what it's spending. And speaking of sanctions, they deserve their own section in this story, because they are the force that's quietly locking Russia inside the death zone with no rope and no way out. Now, sanctions didn't collapse Russia overnight. That was never realistic, and anyone who expected an instant implosion, they misunderstood the game. The real power was always cumulative, a slow burn designed to degrade technology access, inflate costs, narrow markets, and push Russia's trade into more expensive, less reliable channels. Not a knockout punch, but 1,000 cuts. A peer-reviewed study published in early 2026 documented how private sanctions, meaning companies voluntarily pulling out of Russia, reinforced the official restrictions. Goods can still arrive through intermediaries in neutral countries, but at higher prices, lower quality, and longer delivery timelines. Meanwhile, Europe has been quietly severing the energy lifeline that funded Russia's state for generations. Russian gas plummeted from roughly 45% of EU imports in 2021 to around 19% by 2024. Crude oil exports have been pushed to the margins through price caps and outright bans. The European Commission has laid out a formal roadmap to fully end all dependency on Russian energy, and it's following through. New LNG terminals, pipeline diversification, renewable buildouts. Europe is rewiring its entire energy infrastructure to shut Russia out permanently. This isn't a temporary squeeze. It's a structural shift that closes the door that Russia once walked through to fund its state. And the financial hit is already devastating. By February of 2026, Russia's oil and gas revenues had reportedly almost halved year on year, dropping to just under 410 billion rubles, a staggering blow to the state's most critical revenue stream. In January alone, Russia's budget deficit jumped to nearly half of the full year 2026 target. The year had barely started, and the red ink was already spreading. The National Welfare Fund, Russia's rainy day reserve, still holds assets on paper, but liquid reserves are shrinking relative to growing deficits. If oil prices stay in the $55 to $60 per barrel range, which most analysts expect, replenishment isn't happening. The fiscal rule that once protected long-term stability, suspended, modified, overwritten by the logic of permanent war. Growth without development, motion without repair, the death zone, and the door is closing. If any of this sounds familiar, it should, because Russia has walked this exact path before. During World War I, Imperial Russia faced an eerily similar trap: a brutal, protracted war, weak capital markets, and a political system incapable of financing conflict without destabilizing society. A czarist government covered costs through borrowing, money printing, and just hoping that the war would end before consequences arrived. But it didn't. The result was runaway inflation, food shortages, bread riots, and the total collapse of the regime. Economic historians describe the broader catastrophe of 1914 to 1922 as a devastating arc. Mobilization expanded while the economy underneath was systematically shattered, culminating in a collapse of national income and mass premature death. The late Soviet era offers another grim echo. For decades, the crushing burden of military spending against stagnating growth defined the system's final chapter. Secrecy and prioritization sustained the security state for years, but slowly corroded the economic and institutional foundations needed for reform. The information flows needed to manage a modern economy were distorted by military classification. The investment needed to modernize civilian infrastructure was siphoned off year after year. When change finally became unavoidable, there was nothing left to build on. The Soviet Union didn't explode. It hollowed out from the inside. And when the shell finally cracked, there was nothing behind it. The mechanism rhymes every single time. War pushes the state into emergency finance. Emergency finance demands emergency control. Emergency control demands emergency allocation. And every year those emergency measures continue, the cost of reversing course grows, until reversal itself becomes a crisis. The pattern is unmistakable, but the only question is whether anyone in Moscow recognizes it before it's too late. Russia is not going to collapse tomorrow. That's not what the death zone means. What it means is transformation. Slow, grinding, and irreversible. A country where civilian sectors remain starved. Investment stays structurally suppressed. Technology access stays frozen behind sanctions and distrust. And the entire national budget revolves around security rather than development. A state that can still fight, still project strength on the global stage, still put missiles on parade, but one that becomes progressively less capable of generating prosperity, innovation, or any real opportunity for its own people. Fewer engineers, fewer entrepreneurs, fewer taxpayers, fewer young workers entering an economy that needs them more with every passing year. More pension burdens, more infrastructure decay, more dependence on coercion and extraction to keep the system running. Look, that's not a superpower. That's a garrison state slowly hollowing out behind its own walls. By the end of this decade, Russia, they may look nothing like a great power that they pretend to be, and everything like a nation that chose to survive today at the price of existing tomorrow. Erosion, slow, structural, relentless. That is how nations die. So here's the question. Can Russia descend from the death zone before the damage becomes permanent? Or has it already stayed too long, with too little oxygen left to make the climb back down? Let us know in the comments, and if this is the kind of deep analysis that actually makes you understand the world, subscribe to Fall of Nations, because the ground is shifting faster than anyone expected, and we're going to make sure that you see it coming.